Hello, today we're going to be taking a past paper exam question. We're going to break it down into its keywords, transform it into a plan, and then from that plan crank out a polished, shiny A-star paragraph. Now it really warms my heart now how many students have got a solid understanding of this play. You watch the YouTube videos, you've got great teachers, you get it, and that's fantastic. But perhaps you don't necessarily know how to take that knowledge, that understanding of the play, and transform it into the kind of polished A-star paragraphs that are going to have the examiner tap dancing in delight. That is what I'm going to do today. A lot of my students say, Mr. Taylor, your revision videos are the best thing to happen to education since the interactive whiteboard. I might be exaggerating here, I might even be paraphrasing, but the point is they've complimented my videos in the past and now they really want me to focus on showing them how to go from question to plan to polished A-star paragraph. And that's what we're going to do today. And here is the question. This one popped up about 2 years ago, I think. And you'll notice when you open your exam paper, if it's the AQA spec that you're doing, you open the exam paper and you're faced with two questions on inspector calls. One will be thematic, asking you to explore a theme of the play. The other will be more character orientated or character focused, asking you to focus and concentrate on one of the key characters. Today's question is a thematic question, and the theme is gender. How does Priestley present ideas about gender in an inspector calls? That is the question that rears up at us from the exam paper. Now, what we're going to do in the next slide is identify the key words, because that's really going to direct our focus. It's really going to help us to clarify what exactly we're being asked to do by the examiner. Oh yeah, and although there's two questions in the exam paper, you only have to answer one question. Only answer one question. Every year, some nugget does both questions. That does them no favours. Just answer one of those questions. Here you can see then, tastefully done in green blobs, where I've identified those key words. How does Priestley present ideas about gender? I've highlighted how, because how is referring to the language and structure techniques. Sometimes it might say, what methods does Priestley present? How is referring to those language and structural techniques employed by the author. Present is simply another way of saying put forward or introduce. So how does Priestley put forward or introduce ideas about gender? This is the meat of the question, isn't it? Ideas about gender. And what it's asking us to do then is to focus on how men and women are presented or introduced or put forward in this play, but also about how this society sees some certain behaviours as suitable for a man, masculine behaviour, and how some sort of behaviours are suitable or appropriate for a woman, feminine behaviour. Here's a very brief overview of what to expect on the day if you sit in the AQA exam. You'll have 45 minutes to knock out one question on inspector calls. I've said before, don't do two, you're just wasting your time. And personally, the way I break down my time is 15 minutes to plan, 25 for writing, and just 5 minutes at the end to check that my full stop's in the right place, I've spelled everything correctly, and the whole thing makes sense. Pay attention to that time limit, 45 minutes to answer one question. Now I am sure that there's some bearded academic somewhere, some professor, some writer, who has written articles, dissertations, probably books on that question that you've been set in the exam. You are not expected to deliver an exhaustive overview of gender in inspector calls. You just don't have the time. You haven't even got an hour, have you? You've got 3/4 of an hour. So you need to focus on producing a good quality response and be less preoccupied with quantity. Obviously, if you just write 1 or 2 paragraphs, you're snookered, that's going to do you no good. But perhaps 3 to 6 good ideas, well explored, is far more preferable than 10 paragraphs that really skim vaguely over a couple of ideas relating to gender. The examiner's mark scheme. Examiner, he's sitting down to mark your script, he's got his cup of coffee, he's got his Valium, he's got his mark scheme, and this is what he's judging you against. This is how he's determining your final grade. 6.1, 6.5 you'll see at the top. This is because this is a level 6 mark criteria, the top band, the A to A star band, which we're all aiming for, irrespective of ability. We're all aiming for the stars. We want to do the best we can. Unfortunately, I don't think it's always very clear, just reading the examiner's criteria, what it is you're expected to do. I don't think it necessarily makes you a knuckle-scraping simpleton if you, the GCSE student, doesn't understand examiner speak. That's not your native tongue, is it? So what I put at the bottom is a translation, which I think kind of breaks down in a more understandable form what it is you've got to do. You've got to focus on the question, don't waffle. You've got to say intelligent things about this play. You need to lock on to one or two or three ideas and explore them in depth. You need to be analysing language and structure, and if you can, looking at more than one interpretation for one bit of evidence. And you also need to be thinking about the messages, the ideas that Priestley is trying to get across to his audience. The plan. Would you take a look at that work of art? That thing should be hanging in the Saatchi gallery. It's a masterpiece. Now obviously in the exam you're not going to have time to do anything as pretty as that. You're not going to have time to colour code things the way I have. But this needs stressing. This is Mr. Taylor waggling his finger severely at you. You've got to do a plan. If you don't do a plan, you are snookered. You might do a half decent piece of work, but it will be nowhere near as good as it would be if you'd actually marshalled your thoughts, organised your thoughts, and spent a bit of time making some rough notes on what it is you're going to do in your essay. You're working on your plan of attack, as it were. I don't care how clever you are, you need to plan, or it's going to be less good than it should. Now the reason I've colour-coded on my plan, for your benefit, certain bits in yellow, is just so you can see where I am analysing language or structure. Because it is going to affect your grade so much if you're saying loads of intelligent things about the play, but not actually getting into the nuts and bolts of how Priestley is creating effects, is creating meaning through his use of language techniques and structural techniques. So I've highlighted there so you can see that I know to address these things in my essay. Here you've got a close-up of the first point that I'm going to address from my plan. The point I'm making, bear in mind that the questions about how ideas about gender are presented in the play, the first point I'm making is that men in this text are encouraged in capitalist society to be selfish or self-interested. And you'll see I go from that to a quotation. It's Mr. Burns' quotation about a man has to make his own way, has to look after himself, and his family too, of course. Now, the yellow bit shows how I'm analysing the language here. I'm locking in on that second dash. The second dash highlights that Mr. Billings' self-interest is so great that even his family is an afterthought to him. You know, he says, you've got to look after yourself, awkward pause, and his family too, of course. So at the last minute he remembers that he needs to care about his family too. He's that consumed with self-interest. I've also put a secondary interpretation, another arrow coming off that quotation. I've said before, the examiner loves it when you can produce two interpretations for one bit of evidence. And my second interpretation of this piece of evidence is that it shows just like why the proletariat, the poor, suffer so badly. Because the bourgeoisie are being conditioned to feel no moral responsibility to help society's most vulnerable. You know, you just have to look after yourself. That's the message that capitalist society is peddling to its young men. And in the next slide, we'll see how I take this plan, this section of the plan, and parlay it, twist it, turn it into a silky paragraph of A-star goodness. And here we are, another masterpiece, a polished A-star paragraph waiting for your prompt attention, because we're going to deconstruct in a second why it is so good. We'll read it first. Another way ideas about gender are presented in the text comes from Priestley's belief that men in capitalist societies are encouraged to be self-interested. In Act 1, Mr. Burling states, a man has to make his own way, has to look after himself, and his family too, of course. The use of the second dash, the one before, and his family, telegraphs that Mr. Burling's self-interest is so great, even his family are an afterthought. Moreover, the proletariat suffer because bourgeois men feel no moral responsibility towards protecting society's poorest. Okay then, now that you've goggled in awe at this beauty, let's break it down, deconstruct it, link it to the mark scheme. First of all, I said you need to answer the question that's set. And we can see from some of the words I've used in my first line, my point, that I am responding explicitly to the essay question. We've got the word gender in there, we've got the word presented or presents, and we've got a reference to men and women being the two genders, of course. So there's no way the examiner can accuse me of banging on with myself, of waffling on about something irrelevant. I'm focusing explicitly on the question. These bits in blue refer to that second bit of mark criteria, namely that I need to say some intelligent things about the play, some intelligent things about the character. And here I'm saying that what's presented by Priestley is Mr. Burling's self-interest, even his family comes second, and the idea that the proletariat suffer because men are conditioned to accept no moral responsibility for the treatment of the poor. This section in green responds to the third part of the mark criteria, the idea that we need to go into close detail and write a lot about a little. We've taken that one quotation, a man has to make his own way, has to look after himself and his family too, of course, that quotation, and we've pulled two things out of it. We've suggested it emphasises Mr. Burling's self-interest. I've also suggested it shows how the upper class, the bourgeoisie, call them what you will, the ruling class, are conditioned to accept no moral duty towards the plight of the poor, and this kind of compounds the problems of the poor. The fourth chunk of the mark scheme suggests that we need to look at language and structure and think about how they're used to create effects, to shape meaning in the text. And of course I've said about the and his family coming after that last dash emphasises that Mr. Burling's family are an afterthought to him, such as his all-consuming, overriding self-interest. So we're ticking that box there, we're looking at the effects of language or structure. The final section of the mark scheme asked to look at the themes that Priestley is presenting or putting across. And I've suggested an idea, a message, a theme that Priestley's quick to telegraph in this play is the idea that capitalism encourages men to be self-interested. You'll see in the final line as well, I've also said that a byproduct or an effect of this self-interest is that men feel no moral duty towards the plight of the poor. There's no moral responsibility towards protecting society's poorest. So I'm very much looking there, focusing on the messages or themes, the ideas that Priestley is presenting to his audience. And there we have it. We've looked at an essay question, we've broken it down to its key words, we turned that into a plan, and then we twisted that into a paragraph positively spilling over with A-star goodness. Now this video has a sequel where I take some of my other ideas from the plan in response to this question, how does Priestley present ideas on gender? And you can see how I've taken those ideas from the plan and transformed them into A-star paragraphs. Otherwise, all that remains for me to say is best of British luck on exam day, and I'm sure you're going to smash it out of the park.